I can't begin to describe the horrific pain I felt after leaving a narcissistically abusive relationship. The intense confusion, rage, and sense of betrayal. And there was fear too. Some have likened this stage to being similar to a heroin withdrawal. I don't know since I haven't struggled with that, but I know it was one of the worst experiences of my life. Thank you for joining me today on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Dr. Carrie Kerr-McAvoy, a mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience and a narcissistic abuse survivor. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to begin healing after leaving a toxic relationship. We'll also touch on if spirituality can save narcissists from their condition. And when our exes leave us, did the next partner get a better version of them? I'm thrilled you're here with me today. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes and leave a review. Let me know what you think of the show. Thank you so much for your donations since this is a listener-supported podcast, because together we're shedding light on all things related to abuse. So let's listen in to this replay of a TikTok Live. This morning I was chatting with a recent survivor of narcissistic abuse. She had just recently left a toxic relationship and was in incredible pain. It'd been 3 weeks out and she was still really hurting, and she was wanting to know from those of us who have been further on our journey, when does the pain stop? That brought me back and it reminded me of some recent lessons that I've learned in this healing process, things that I didn't know. You'd think that you would know. You think as a psychologist, right? I mean, that's my training, was to understand everything related to mental health and healing and recovery and all of this. But it's amazing to me how poorly we educate our children, how poorly educated we are on how to handle emotions. We often are unprepared for the intensity, and when we encounter it, we want it to stop. And what we often don't know is that the way in which we do what we do to get it to stop often is the wrong things. It sets us back, it delays us, it maybe even hinders the healing. We don't help our healing. We could actually possibly hinder the healing. So I thought I'd start today with talking about how do we actually heal? What is emotional recovery, trauma recovery look like, especially when you're in that raw, bleeding stage where you can't stop thinking about the narcissistic ex. You're angry that they've moved on and they're already posting pretty pictures of themselves on social media. You feel like your life is in shambles. Maybe your relationship with your kids is not in the best place. You may be financially strapped and you're scared. You're literally scared because you don't know how this person's going to come after you and how long it's going to take and what a mess your life may or may not be. It's a horrible spot. It's one of the worst places I think I've ever been in my life. I mean, I've suffered some pretty catastrophic things, and I would have to say this is right up there. I heard someone just recently liken it to an addiction withdrawal. I can't attest to that because I've not struggled with that, so I don't know what it feels like. But I wouldn't be surprised if recovering from narcissistic abuse, if the healing in that first stage, when we've been discarded, or even when we're the ones walking out, I wouldn't be surprised if it's similar to an addiction withdrawal. So let me give you some advice about how to help this what we often don't know, and what we often think is, we think it's almost like bad advice because it's so painful. It's a difficult period because our life is in a massive adjustment. When we're in a narcissistic abusive relationship, that relationship has very much defined, given structure to everything about our lives. It has defined how we're interacting with money. Our social support system has changed. Even how we're spending time has changed. I know for me, what we watched on TV, our leisure activity, even what we ate changed. Everything changed because the narcissist is literally like the sun. They become the center of the world and you are like a satellite around this sun. You're gravitating your life around this person. And in order to keep things from being volatile and tumultuous and to avoid all the conflict, you then begin to modify everything about yourself. You essentially recreate yourself when you're in this relationship. So when you step out, you've lost who you were originally. I know for me, who I was before I met the narcissist died. I could feel her dying, that my innocence was destroyed. My sense of the world was essentially a good place was broken. My trust was shattered. I felt like I'd severely betrayed myself. I felt the person that I had, that even the person that was widowed, that was surviving the loss of my first marriage, and that was a very, very painful place. I felt like she was gone. And I didn't really know who this new person was. And I didn't even know if I wanted to be this new person or I liked her or where I was going to go. I mean, I had all these myriads of questions, but I at least knew what was familiar, even though it wasn't good with what happened. I mean, it was terrible. What happened with the narcissist was terrible. It was familiar. It provided structure and I understood the rules of it. So part of the pull is not only are we missing the dopamine hit, the oxytocin that we had, that's kind of the bonding, cuddling emotions, the rush, the adrenaline rush that we would get when we're scared, then it would turn out all right. Yes, there's this myriad of emotions or hormones that are happening and chemicals that are happening. They're very toxic and very addicting. But in addition to that, your sense of self has been shattered and you don't really have a new replacement. So part of the pull back is to go back to at least something that you understood and you knew the rules of, even if it was bad. It's better. I mean, the weird part about humans is that if you're faced with three options, and they found this with attention, and I believe this happens everywhere on everything. If you have the option to be admired and respected, good attention, wonderful attention, or to be in conflict, be thought of as a horrible person, bad attention, versus no attention, being invisible, being not seen at all. Believe it or not, the way we're going to rank order those of importance, we want the positive attention, obviously, that's the best, but we'll settle for negative attention over nothing at all. We don't like nothing at all. So I think this is the same for our sense of structure and our sense of self. At least we knew who we were in the narcissistic abusive relationship. It was bad, but at least we knew who we were. We no longer are who we used to be. And now we're in a place of lostness with nothing at all. And that feels absolutely miserable. So we would prefer the bad to the nothing. Isn't that weird? But that's the way we work. What I would suggest, if you find yourself in this beginning throes of things, don't run away from the pain. I know that's counterintuitive. It just doesn't make sense. Don't run away from the pain. Because if you do, you're going to be doing things like addictive behavior. You're going to be dissociating. You're going to be doing all the things that get you out of and away from the pain, out of your body, out of your head. And those things don't help processing. In fact, one of the things we notice with addicts is that addicts often end up developmentally wherever they started using is where they stopped growing. So if they were 14 and started using, when they start to get in this sober and start the journey towards health, there's essentially emotionally a 14-year-old having to learn all the things that they didn't learn that they should have learned in the years that they spent using the drug. The same for us. If we run away from the pain, we're not healing. We're delaying the process, and we're not moving ourselves through the journey. So what do you do with the pain? Because frankly, the pain is awful and it's very scary and it feels kind of overwhelming. Well, see, there's the paradox, and this is what I discovered. It isn't as bad or as big or as horrible as you think it is. It's your anticipation of it that makes it so awful. So you sit with it. When it happens, this is what I learned. You actually sit with it. You say to yourself, okay, what am I feeling? Let's put some words to it. Yeah, I'm feeling this and I'm feeling this and I really miss this. And don't judge yourself. I really miss the relationship. You know it's bad. I mean, you'll have this conversation with you. You know it's really bad. Don't you remember the bad? Yeah, I know it was really bad, but there was good periods too. Yeah, well, there were good periods, but it was really bad. Do you want that bad treatment back? No, no, I really don't want that, but damn, this really hurts. But if you kind of sit with it like that, if you sit with this and just even set a timer, that's what I would do. I would set a timer for 20 minutes and just allow yourself to experience the pain. And what you're going to discover is that it isn't the size and scope that you thought it is. It's going to be more manageable. And you're also going to find another really odd thing that we usually don't know about feelings. Feelings are what's called state driven. They're not traits, they're states. That means they're temporary. You cannot sustain one feeling for a long period of time. It wears out, it disappears. So if you sit with it long enough, it starts to fade. It's when we avoid it that the pain continues because we haven't sat with it and we haven't let it extinguish itself. So I would really urge you to sit with it. Now, what do you do when you sit with it? I have mental conversations with myself, but you could journal, you could cry, you could listen to really sad music. There's all sorts of ways in which you sort of can learn to experience this. I see that Baxter Inflame says this is not easy to endure. It's not easy to endure, and I would highly recommend getting help. I think it's very, very helpful to get help to do that. Every time I've gone through one of these really, really rough spots, I have definitely been in counseling and therapy at the same time. So I'm not saying do this, gut this out, but without therapy or without a coach. But I do think that there's a way we handle it on our own time that's also very helpful, that we don't need just to save it up for the therapy appointment, go in, dump, and think that 50 minutes is going to be enough time. It's not. You're going to get caught off guard and triggered, and something's going to remind you. In fact, it was, for me this week, I heard a song. It was played, and I used to listen to this album all the time. It was one of my favorite albums. It was during the period of when I was widowed, and I would listen and find it so encouraging. In fact, I sent at least one or two of the tracks to my narcissistic ex, trying to share part of my life with him. I don't know if he ever listened or even cared to listen. But when I got into the relationship with him, I stopped listening to this artist, and it came back. It was on a TikTok live, and this guy was playing it as meditation. And like, there it was, and wow, it was a flashback, and I got to crying about me, my who I was and who was gone, and But that's what I did. I sat with it, I listened to it, I talked to myself, I processed the feelings, and then I moved through it. You move through it. I'm a sci-fi fan, and I love Star Trek. So if you had a choice between Star Wars or Star Trek, I'm definitely a Trekkie. There is movies, and I know not all the movies were good, but I liked them because I'm a Trekkie. But the first movie was about how they got trapped in this big thing near the end, and they kept trying to pull out, and they can't pull out, and they don't have enough, engine strength to do it. It was when they finally decided to move through it, to push through it, that they got to the other side. And that's what most of us do. We get into these painful places. We think, back away, get out. It's too hot. Let's, just flee from it, run from it. But what we don't know is that we're prolonging it and we're burning ourselves out by that. We're not processing it. Are you at risk of being targeted by a dangerous man? What type of women do narcissist and psychopath males seek out? And what can all of us do to protect ourselves so that we're less at risk of being abused by these toxic people? If these questions intrigue you and you'd love to know the answers, then please join me for an upcoming interview on November 10th. I'm going to be meeting with researcher, author Sandra L. Brown. She has spent her lifetime working and researching dangerous types of men. Let's find out how we can reduce our exposure and what we can do to begin to protect ourselves better by identifying the risk factors. Get your tickets through the link in the show notes, and no worry if you can't make it the night of the event, because all ticket holders will receive a complimentary replay after the event concludes. This is a webinar you don't want to miss. How do you not run away from the pain? By telling yourself the pain isn't going to destroy you. It isn't going to destroy you. You think it will. You fear that it will, but it won't destroy you. It can't. Literally ask yourself, what could it do? Okay, so it gets really, really bad and you wonder if there's any reason to continue breathing, but all right, so you just keep breathing. You just keep breathing, and even though you keep wondering, just because you feel something doesn't mean it turns into action. Action and feelings are far, far apart. You have to have an intentionality to take something that's a feeling and make it into a behavior. So I don't find any feelings that I have scary because I know that there's such a gulf I have to take all sorts of movement and energy and planning to make it into something intentional. So feeling is just a feeling. And yes, feelings can feel big and they can take us into really wild places, but it burns itself out. You answer the question and you sit with it and it burns itself out. So try that. I'd love you guys to try that and come back and tell me if you've discovered that, because I think we have a lot of myths about feelings. One, we think that, and I know I've heard Brene Brown say the same thing, we tend to empower feelings by avoiding them. We act as if they're dangerous and if they lead to bad things, and they actually don't. They can't. It's when we give ourselves permission to act on the feeling that's problematic. But feelings don't do anything. They're just an experience or an internal experience. So test it and come back and let me know what you discover. I'd be really curious about that and see if you find that if I'm correct. I'm a very spiritual person, by the way. I'm very rooted in that. If you Google me, you'll find out that my first books are devotionals. So I'm very familiar with religion and the, Christianity. I'm very, very familiar with Christianity. Do I believe that culture or good spiritual practices will result in a lack of narcissism? If the person has the ability to be self-reflective and is empathic, yeah, sure, God can work with that. Sure, I see that. But here's the problem. They don't. So and anything that's has a lot of ability to control and to hold power attracts narcissistic people. I want to share a story that devastated me, and I think it's a very cautionary tale. I don't know how many of you are familiar. You'd have to be in the Christian circle, evangelical Christian circle, to be aware of this, but Ravi Zachariah. He was an apologetics who went around to college campuses and preached on the depth of what the root foundation of Christianity. To me, was very impactful to my life, made a big difference, got me to be thinking about my relationship with God and with the Bible and with truth. But there were allegations being made. I didn't know. They were kept hush-hush against him, saying that he was actually a sexual predator. And then when he died, the women who were being preyed on by him actually one of them went to a journalist, got the journalist to do an exploration into this to see if the allegations were true, and they found out it was true. This man had led a double life that was horrific. Some of the worst stuff I heard. There's Epstein out there who's done very, very bad things. But this guy touted himself to be somebody that he wasn't. He was very much a wolf in sheep's clothing. So that's a perfect example of, you can know the truth. You can even be heavily rooted in it. You can teach in it. But if it does not affect you at an inside level, and you fail to see the way in which you're inconsistently presenting yourself and inconsistently living, it will not change you and it will not save you. It will not. I mean, for anybody who really is familiar with the Bible, some of the worst offenders were the religious, the Pharisees. So as much as I would love to think knowing the truth would set us free, and I do believe that's true, but we have to let it set us free. It doesn't just in itself, the knowledge in itself, we have to let it do work in us. So there's where I struggle with. Spirituality is very, very important, but it doesn't solve people's depravity. The Bible says the human heart's depraved above all things. Do victims tend to think all the next partners are narcissistic? Does victims tend to think all next partners are narcissistic or abusive? I don't think the victims do. I think victims think that the next partners are blind and probably being taken advantage of, or maybe we feel like we're feeling angry with them. Here's the wild part about my story. The person that my ex left me for, he'd already had a relationship with. They had an ongoing relationship that actually preceded our relationship. In a way, he really betrayed her. He and her were talking. Well, there's two theories about what could have been happening. He either betrayed her and tossed her out and then got in with me, and then we ended up getting married. Or him and her were scheming against me, and the two of them were, and it was a plan. The plan was that he would marry me, get my money, and then get rid of me so that then he and her could live the life that they want. I suspect it may have been the second, not the first. But either way, I mean, so yeah, in that case, she's a really, really dark person, a very evil person, just as bad as him. But I don't think that's true of most victims. I think the subsequent victims they think the same thing that we think. They think that they met their soulmate. They're being love bombed and deceived just like we were. And here's the other dangerous part. The partner that we were with has gotten better. They learned from us, so they're getting a more sophisticated version of what we met. He or she's improved on their skill sets, and now they're using everything that they've learned in our relationship, and they're using it against a new person. So I feel sorry for them, honestly. I know that they're in trouble, very, very much in trouble. Don Hennessy says, and I really love this in his book, how he gets into his head. Don Hennessy is part of the law enforcement task force in Ireland, working with domestic violence partner. And for years, they spent time trying to figure out what was the similarity between all victims. Was victims codependent? Were victims from troubled homes? Did victims have bad boundaries? They kind of kept trying to find something that could save victims. That was the intent. They could put some program together in treatment and help victims. What they found was there was no consistent presentation of victims. Did you get what I said? There is no consistent presentation of victims. The only commonality all victims had was that they met a predator. It wasn't the victim's personality. It wasn't the victim's history. It wasn't the victim's boundaries. It was the fact that the victims met a predator. He then goes on in this first chapter, one of the first chapters, introing this whole topic, and he says, so all of you who've not ever gotten a narcissistic abusive relationship, don't all get on your high horse and think that you're better than those who've gotten into a narcissistic abusive relationship. You're not any more sophisticated with boundaries. You don't protect yourself any better. You just got lucky. You haven't met a sophisticated enough offender. Because if you did, you would have gotten into a relationship with them, because that's how good they are. They're predators who hone the skills at getting better and better at hunting and targeting and grooming. You just got lucky and didn't run into one. I love that, because any of us who've been in this side of it as a victim knows how many times that we have been maligned for being a victim, that there is essentially something wrong with us. But when we focus on victimology and wondering what's wrong with us for getting into a relationship, what we're not looking at is we're not looking at the predator. We're not asking what's happened that's created these people that go out and then harm people like this, and how do we stop that damage? We're looking in the wrong direction. And he says, I love this is what Hennessy says in the book. He says, when you do that, when you look at victims and blame victims and put the onus of responsibility on them instead on the predators, you're colluding with the predator. You're actually augmenting and aiding and abetting what they're doing, because you're not holding them responsible. And that's what they want. They want you to do that. It's like a sleight of hand misdirection. Oh, look at that poor, pathetic person who's all broken and wounded, and they got into the relationship with me. Bad them. What red flags do they miss? Who hurt them? When we do that, we're taking our eyes off of the person who did the injury, who should have not done the injury in the first place, who should not be a bad person, should not be evil, should not be deceptive. And we're not looking at them and saying, stop doing that. We're looking in the wrong direction at the person who's bleeding. And then on top of it, we're slapping them across the face for having the bad luck of meeting a predator. Yeah, we need to reverse our thinking. And I wonder why I know I'm gotten on a soapbox, but I wonder why we're so misdirected. Part of it, I think, as a psychologist, we're afraid of being wounded. We don't like seeing victims. It scares us. So we want to then say, I'm not like you. I have it more together than you do. See, I have good boundaries. I know how to say no. I'm better at recognizing the flags. Look at my good relationships that I've been in. I think we're trying to separate ourselves. It's not me. It's not me. I don't do those things. But the sad part is, yes, you're vulnerable like the rest of us. Yes, you miss red flags too. You just got really, really lucky and met a person who wasn't that deceptive, that wasn't that exploitive. Or you're in a relationship that you're in denial about and you're not really truly looking at it. I don't know. I mean, I think both situations. And I think it's also really uncomfortable for us to look at predators because I think they scare us and we feel helpless in the face of them. I think we're not for sure what to do with them. We're not even for sure how to criminalize this behavior. It would be, wouldn't that be interesting to criminalize narcissistic abuse? I just heard, I'm trying to remember who said this, that narcissistic abuse is one of the most dangerous forms of abuse because it actually damages the brain of the victims. It causes deterioration and decompensation of the victim's level of functioning. So yeah, you can be physically abusive and you will maybe kill a person for this, but we are killing people over a long period of time through narcissistic abuse as we basically undo their personality, tear them into pieces, and then make them essentially a non-person. It's terrible. But how do you criminalize that? I don't know. I don't really have a good answer for that. Healing is a process, an awkward, stuttering, nonlinear journey. Expect days of just surviving with frequent setbacks. It helps to know that you're not alone. And if you find yourself in this position, I have a special group just for you, a safe place to share openly about the issues common to all narcissistic abuse survivors. Come join Toxic Free Relationship Club on a cool new social app called Vibely. There you'll be able to share your victories, get advice about your struggles, and also take part of mental health challenges. And at a higher tier level, monthly video chats. We all need support in this phase. It's so vital. So come join, because I can't wait to meet you. And until next Monday, have a great weekend. Bye-bye.